Hello, it's Lromanosky from Calgary, Canada, and Aidan Goss shooting the video. And what we have here are a couple of JDM cars, Japanese domestic market cars. Behind me is an economy car. It is a 2009 Honda Insight Hybrid. And over here we have a Toyota Century, Toyota's finest car, you know, the best car they could make. Even above Lexus. We'll do a video on this car later. Today we'll focus on the Insight. But this was a car that is designed to be chauffeured and to transport the rear occupants in as much comfort, silence, refinement as possible. 5-liter V12 engine and a really beautiful machine to drive. This car here had a completely different objective, which was to transport 5 people using the least amount of fuel and for the least amount of upfront cost as well. So you may have seen my other video on a Toyota Prius. I brought in an 09 Prius as well. The Insight and the Prius were competitors. 2009. It's 2024 now, so 2009 model year is 15 years old. I can't bring in a newer car than that. So these were the newest hybrids I could bring in, and I bought one of each just to see the differences of them. Okay, so that is an interesting discussion. In this video, we'll do a little bit of history on the Insight, a Prius Insight comparison. Then we'll talk about the JDM car, which this is, and then we'll talk about this particular car. We have videos underneath of the undercarriage, etc. The short of it is that when you get a car from Japan, the climate is especially benign. The drivers are careful, the cars are inspected regularly, and you can pick up some really nice examples. This 2000 Insight has less than 20,000 kilometers on it, I think 17 and change. And if you look around it, it looks almost new. So we'll go through this video in sections. You can skip ahead to the various sections. There's a table of contents if you like. But first we'll move into the history of the Honda Insight. Okay, so the Insight was Honda's first mass production hybrid car. Toyota beat Honda to the market in Japan with their Prius in 1997, but Honda beat Toyota into the North American market with their first Insight in, I think, December 2000 or December 1999. And the Prius followed in June of 2000. So these were the first 2 hybrids that were widely available in North America. At that time, they were quite different. The Insight, the original Insight, Gen 1, was almost like a prototype. It was a tiny little bubble of a car, all aluminum, made on the same assembly line as the S2000 and the NSX, a loss leader by a long way. There are very few all aluminum cars. It was it. It was a spectacular piece of engineering designed to really push the envelope to get the maximum fuel economy. The only other car that I can think of that pushed it even further was Volkswagen's XL1. I think that was it. And that was like a 1-liter car, carbon fiber. It was $250,000, and I think they only made like 250 of them or something. The XL1 was, it looked like a spaceship. It was extremely expensive, not really a practical car. Again, it was just a prototype. And really the original Insight was too, because it only sat 2 people, and it only had a load rating, I think it's only 100 kilos of luggage and space. So it really wasn't a practical everyday car. It was very small, very aerodynamic and very light, but not that useful. The Prius, on the other hand, was always like a 5-seat proper car. So when it came time to redesign the Insight for the Generation 2, Honda wasn't going to do the same thing as the original Insight. It was going to be a five-door hatchback, 5-passenger, like a real car, similar to the Prius. When it came out, Honda's brief on it was they wanted a hybrid that was more accessible, figuring that the people most interested in the ecological benefits of a hybrid car were younger people who may not be able to afford a more expensive one. And the Toyota was considerably more expensive. So Honda brought in the Insight at a few $3,000–4,000 less than the base Prius. It was, when it came out, it was actually the best-selling car in Japan. The Prius was a lot more successful in North America than the Insight, and in fact, Honda's not making an Insight anymore. So I'll explain the differences. The hybrid system that Honda came up with was something they called IMA, Integrated Motor Assist. And what it did is it took the flywheel, which is a big steel disc at the back of the crankshaft that smooths out the pulses from the reciprocating piston and allows the car to idle smoothly and rev smoothly, okay? And on the flywheel, there's a ring gear and little notches in it, and that's what the starter engages to spin the engine, okay? So they took out the flywheel, the ring gear, and the starter, and replaced it with an electric motor, very thin, only maybe 3 or 4 centimeters wide, but the diameter of the flywheel. And so they took the flywheel off, put the electric motor on it. And so this electric motor could then start the car, so they got rid of the starter. It could also be, the flywheel also functions as like a balance weight for the reciprocating engine. And so it balanced the engine as well. And then it could provide, I think, 10 kilowatts and, forget the number, maybe 20 or 30 pound-feet of torque, instant torque. And so then that electric motor was mated to the back of the combustion engine. The combustion engine in the Gen 1 Insight was a little 1-liter, 3-cylinder, I think maybe 67 horsepower, something like that. So not very powerful, but with the added torque of the electric motor on demand, it could drive like maybe a 1.5-liter car. So the idea was that if you had the IMA system with the Honda, that you could get by with a much smaller, more efficient internal combustion engine because you had what in effect was an electric supercharger to come in and give you the torque and the power when you needed it, okay? And then on the overrun, when you backed off the throttle, this electric motor then became a generator and then charged the battery. So it's a very elegant solution. Like, it does away with a couple really heavy components, the starter motor and the flywheel and ring gear, replaces it with an electric motor that wasn't much heavier, that did the job of a balance shaft, it did the job of a starter, and it does the job of an electric motor as well. So very elegant, simple solution. The downside of the IMA system is that the vehicle is basically always driven with the internal combustion engine, and the electric motor comes in and comes out and supplies power and then regenerates power, but the motive power of the vehicle is always the internal combustion engine. Toyota has a different system. It's a planetary gearbox. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it allows the car to be run on electric power, the internal combustion engine, or both combined. So that gave the Prius a little bit more, more options when it came to saving fuel, including turning the combustion engine off while the car was on the move. And that means the Prius was a little bit more economical. Okay, so the Insight had a simpler hybrid system. It cost less money to buy but it didn't get quite the fuel economy that the Prius did. But Honda offered this as the lowest cost hybrid on the market. Okay. Also, the Honda is a little bit sportier than the Prius. The Prius makes no pretension to being, has any driver involvement whatsoever. It's quiet, refined, it gets you from A to B, it's very efficient, but it's nowhere close to even having any pretenses for being like fun to drive. Whereas the Honda, it's got sports seats, it's got a sportier cockpit, it's got, firmer suspension, and it's just a little bit more engaging than a Prius. So those are the differences between those cars, okay? The Insight then, it doesn't have any electric-only range, and it has a smaller battery pack. Now, in real-world driving, the Prius might be 10% better, and it depends on what kind of driving it is. For instance, the advantage the Prius has over the Insight, with its more complex planetary gearbox and its ability to shut off the engine while the car is on the move. The advantage of that occurs in city driving, okay? On these constant starts and stops and a run up to freeway speeds and then back down and stoplights and so on. In those situations in the city, the Prius will shut off the engine quite a bit, and it will save fuel doing so. The Honda will, in those situations, will cut fuel, but it's still spinning the engine. So it's just not quite as efficient in the city. In the highway, the engine in the Prius is going to need to run all the time, the same as the Insight. Okay, so at highway speed at a steady 110 or 120 kilometers an hour, you won't get very far on the battery power in a Prius. You won't go anywhere, and you'll need the power from the combustion engine to push the car through the air and roll it over the ground and overcome the rolling resistance. So the combustion engine will need to always be on at highway speeds in both cars. In that situation, the Insight probably gets a little bit better fuel economy because it's a little bit lighter, okay? In the city, the Prius gets a little bit better fuel economy. When I drove both, basically in the city, I get about just under 5 liters per 100 kilometers in this car, and in the Prius I got about 4.5 liters. So in my experience in urban driving, there was about 0.5 liters per 100 kilometers difference between the two. Now, Priuses were more expensive new, and they're more expensive used. A Prius would be, everything else being equal, probably 25% more than an Insight. So quantifying that's about $3,000 more for the equivalent Prius. Like if I had, this one is under 20,000 kilometers, I'm asking $15,000 for this. If I had a 15,000 kilometer 09 Prius, I probably want something close to 18,000 Canadian dollars for it. So about 20% more. Obviously, these are premium prices for extremely low kilometer as new cars. You can get a car with a lot of these cars have 200,000 and 300,000 kilometers on them. So you can get Insights and hybrids for half that amount. Okay, but the absolute top of the market for perfect cars, maybe $15,000 and $18,000. Now, quantifying the 0.5 liters per 100 kilometers, that is, maybe 10%. That might be only $150 a year or something like that. So it would take you many years of driving to make up the $3,000 price premium for a Prius. So when I bought both of these cars, the objective was to find a car that had the lowest overall cost of ownership. Well, I have lots of friends who just want to get from A to B for the lowest possible cost. I mean, that does kind of make up the vast majority of motorists who want a reliable car to get to work. Okay, so I thought, well, what would that car be? And I thought, well, you know, it's not a European car because of the cost of maintenance. It's a Japanese or maybe a Korean car. It's a car that's fully depreciated, 10 or 15 years old, and it's a car that needs to have lots of life in it. So you can eliminate the European cars altogether. You can focus on the Japanese and Asian cars. Then cost of ownership, basically fuel is a big part of that. So then you're looking for the most fuel efficient cars, which are the hybrids, 5 liters per 100 kilometers. Now the problem is finding a 10 or 15-year-old car, especially an economy car, that isn't just completely used up and isn't completely rusty. Because in Alberta, there's salt on the roads, and these cars are not well protected for rust. So to find a good example of a 10 or 15-year-old Asian car is extremely difficult or even impossible. You might find some elderly couple who has one on Victoria that never drove it or something like that, but normally these go to young families and they're used, and people buy these cars to drive them. They're not treasured trophies. They live on the street usually, and they have usually a hard life, and they're rusty, used up, and totally worn out. So finding that car in Canada is really tough. So I landed in Japan, and what I found was that there's an almost unlimited supply of really, really low kilometer perfect cars in Japan. You can only import them if they're 15 years old. So that puts us at, 2009 or maybe some of the earliest 2010 model years. And so that's where I landed with the Insight and the Prius together, just to compare the cars. Which one has the lowest overall cost of ownership? Well, it's got to be the Insight, because the Priuses are, like I said, about 25% more expensive, everything else being equal. And the fuel economy saving is only, half a liter, maybe 1 liter tops per 100 kilometers. And, that is 150 or 200 bucks a year. So that means that after all my research, answering the question of what car could I buy, new or used car, that offered the lowest overall cost of ownership, it's that. Still going to be worth 50 cents on the dollar to what you pay for it in 5 years. If you put 20,000 kilometers on it, it's going to still have low kilometers, 120,000 kilometers. Somebody will still buy it for $7,500. So, your cost of your depreciation, which is the biggest cost, is $7,500 over 5 years. You're probably going to spend no more than $1,500 a year on fuel. I get less than 5 liters per 100 kilometers on that. The servicing on these cars is very low. It's a 1.3 liter engine. It takes like 3.5 liters of oil or something. You'll never use the brakes up because you use regenerative braking, and it can be serviced by any Honda mechanic or independent. So your cost of maintenance is very low. You may have to buy a battery for a couple $1,000s at some point. I haven't had to buy one, but it's possible. And that's the high voltage battery. And that's about it. So you've got the lowest depreciation, under $2,000 a year for that, maybe $500 a year for maintenance, including a battery amortized over the 5 years, and then almost nothing for fuel. So if you want something that's a decent, nice looking car, in nice shape, like I mean, let's establish that as a threshold, that it has to be a decent car, and you know, it can't be depressing to look at or embarrassing to show up at. That means this car satisfies those who want to drive from A to B with reliable transportation for the lowest cost possible, and that's the car, and there's thousands more like it in Japan. The obstacle, of course, is the steering wheel's on the other side. Some insurers don't want to insure you, or if they do, they don't want to give you full coverage. But if you can adapt to driving on the right-hand side, which is easy, in my opinion, then that's the car. You're not going to drive a nicer car for less money than this car right here. And that's why I've chosen it for family transport, because I'm driving a lot with 3 kids in soccer and so on, going from one corner of the city to the other, 100 kilometers a day. I mean, I also have a full-size Range Rover that I use to pull my travel trailer. If I drove that the entire time, it would cost me $9,000 a year in gas, okay? This is gonna cost me, you know, one-fourth of that. The Range Rover gets about 18 liters per 100 kilometers. The Century gets about 12 to 14 liters per 100 kilometers. My Lexus ES350, the Subaru WRX that I had and sold, those cars get about between 9.5 and 10 liters per 100 kilometers. And the Prius and the Insight are half of that. So these cars use about half the fuel of, you know, a mid-size, you know, family mobile, and a quarter the fuel of a big SUV. Okay, so let's do a walk around on the car. The great thing about JDM cars is you can get a car that's 15 years old and it doesn't have a single rock chip. The hood is completely free. I've got a little mark there, and that's it. The whole front bumper cover, like, I just don't have a single chip on it. So no chips in the lights, no yellowing of the lenses. We shot a video underneath the car. The underside of the car is spotless. There's no scrapes on the spoiler at all. We have steel wheels with hubcaps. They're in good shape. There's 2 sets of wheels. It's on winters now. There's a set of summer tires. And the summer tires date code to, I think, 2021, and these to, I think, 2016. So these are a little bit old, but they still have at least a season on them. There are no scratches on the sides of the car. There's no door dings. The character lines are laser straight. There's no evidence of paintwork. There's a couple of very small marks on the rear bumper cover where something was loaded in. And other than that, the exterior of the car is basically perfect. When we put it on the lift as well, you know, the lower sills and the lower parts of the bumper are perfect. You know, the car really does show as new. You know, the paint still has a deep luster. There's no differences detectable anyway between panels with the silver metallic paint, which can be difficult to match. There's no marks on the front bumper, and it really does show as a new car. It's like I said, impossible to reasonably fault inside and out. This is as close to a perfect 2009 or 2010 in North America Honda Insight as you'll be likely to find. It is being driven, so by the time it does go for sale, I mean, it is possible it picks up a couple rock chips in the meantime.
but I'm being as careful as I can be with it to sell it in exactly this condition. But this is the beauty of buying a car from Japan, is that when you get it, you can see the logo of the selling dealer there. That the vehicles are virtually perfect. The wheel covers there are a couple marks on the wheel covers, light scratching on a couple of them, and that is about it.
Okay, so let's look inside this car. Take a look at it. And it's pretty hard to fault. Okay, so keeping in mind a lot of these cars were used, for young families and so on, they can be a real mess. And it's not like we did a mammoth cleaning job on the car. This is the way it came. There's no indication that there were ever child seats in the car. It doesn't really look like anybody's ever sat in the back. There's no wear on any of the seats on the driver's bolster. Every piece of plastic, piece of trim, the headliner, steering wheel, the knobs, there's basically no indication of any wear whatsoever. The carpets are still fresh. There's no stains. The car looks like a well taken care of 17,000 kilometer car. There's no, it's almost like a new car. If somebody said this was the dealer demo or something like that, I even think it's in better shape than a dealer demo, just because it had obviously, fewer people driving it. It really is impossible to reasonably fault. It looks like a new car, or at least a nearly new car. And one thing I noticed when I parked it, in the parking lot, is that the design is still pretty fresh. It's an unusual design. But when I parked it next to a whole bunch of late model cars, it didn't look dated at all. This, if you pass this in a parking lot, you might think it's a new or nearly new car. You wouldn't think it's 15 years old. The design doesn't date it, and certainly the condition doesn't. So that's why I'm so bullish on these JDM cars. Now, lots of people bring over JDM cars, but they're mostly the tuner cars, the Skylines and the Altezas and the super luxury cars. I guess like a Century, but more the Lexuses. I don't know anybody who's really bringing in the lower cost cars. But to me, this is just as exciting as anything else, because you get for 15 grand, you basically get a brand new car. And as a dad with 3 kids who does a lot of driving, that's kind of exactly what I want. And it's not an unsafe car. It's got I think a 5-star safety rating. Honda builds small cars, but uses expensive materials and good engineering, and it has a robust safety cage and all the curtain airbags and so forth. So it's not lacking anything in terms of safety.
So we've got the 2009 JDM Honda Insight Hybrid on the lift. And so we'll go and I'll do a detailed examination of the undercarriage and show you just how clean this car is. Okay, so an examination of the undercarriage. We'll start with the spoiler, the lower spoiler, because obviously this can pick up lots of scrapes. And we have got these little sacrificial pieces. They just well, looks like they just pull out, or it's a press fit in there. And the owner put like black electrical tape on it just to protect it, which I've never seen before. Anyway, we can see the lower edge of the spoiler, and there's not a mark on it. And even the bottom of these pieces, you know, this tape doesn't want to come off very badly. Otherwise I'd peel it off. But you know, a tiny little bit of nibbling on that piece. But like I said, they're sacrificial. Okay, so maybe we'll just walk around the lower bits. We can look at the sills. You know, we can look for evidence of improper jacking, because sometimes, you know, the people don't get the pads in the right place and they dent, you know, the sill, or put the, you know, find another place to jack, and which is not meant to support the weight of the car, and damage it. So that can be surprising. You know, we don't see any of that here on the rear bumper. We can look around and we don't see any. Well, there's nothing there. Nothing. I mean, the exhaust, look at the exhaust. It looks brand new in this car. Okay, so again, next jacking point. And that's just undercoat that's like a rubberized seal, an undercoat that's blown in. And sometimes this rubber coat, it dries, it cracks, or gets, you know, the jacking pad, you know, squishes the coating and it starts coming out, and then you start getting rust in there. So you don't even see that. Okay, so that's the lower spoiler. The next thing I'll look at is, you know, sometimes when the car is in for servicing, you have all these little plastic fasteners, and you know, they don't always get, you know, there's lots of them, and so, you know, they get lost or they get chewed up, and they're only good for a couple of times. So on many cars, you know, half of these are missing, and often we see, you know, these pieces, these lower pieces broken. You know, the car runs over a rock or something, and these trim panels are cracked, and then we see a bunch of the fasteners missing, and, you know, you can find all kinds of things like, you know, wire holding stuff up and whatever. So this looks all undisturbed. The under tray is uncracked. All the fasteners are in place. And the next thing I look at is, you know, is there any corrosion for the metal fasteners? Okay, so these are going to be the first things that show corrosion. And, you know, even after a couple of years, those threads can be, in Alberta, those threads can be rusty, and that bolt can be seized on. Okay, so we can look at all the different fasteners. Now there's a little bit of a brown coating on that. That's actually just wax that I put on. It's the bright cadmium plating underneath that. So that's just still wet. You can see that. That's just actually wet wax. I sprayed all of those, all the bolts that I could find, just so that, since they stay nice. Okay. We'll also look for damage on the floorboards. Of course, this orange cable houses the high voltage cables, so we want to make sure that's not damaged for sure. And again, we look at more fasteners and so on. The under trays are in place. There's no body damage. We get to the back, and we see the rubber, you know, holding up the exhaust isn't cracked. There's no damage. You know, these pieces here are steel. That's plastic. This is steel, and this beam axle here is steel. Well, these get peppered with stones, and then they start to rust. And within a few years in Alberta, you know, those can be really rusty, as can the rear springs. I mean, we see the decals that are still on the shocks, like the exhaust looks brand new. The coil spring there isn't rusty. We see the original CAD plating on the, I guess that's the fuel filler. Again, you know, we don't see any corrosion at all on any of these fasteners, okay? So this, you know, this looks, you know, it would either look like a few-year-old summer car, you know, maybe a car from Vancouver Island or something like that that's a few years old, but you will never, like virtually, unless it's like an exotic that has no mileage on it, you'll never find an '09 Honda that looks like this that came from Canada. Like you just, like, I mean, it would just be almost impossible to find. Yet in Japan, you know, you can find cars like this. They're relatively common, and they're, you know, it's a bit of work and a hassle to bring them over and, you know, get them licensed and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, this looks like a brand new car underneath almost, okay? And, you know, if you're looking for, you know, basically economical transport, and you want a 10 or 15-year-old Honda or Toyota, and it's a, you know, it's an Alberta car or a Calgary car, it's going to be a total mess underneath, okay? And normally they have really high mileages. So this is what you get when you get a low kilometer JDM car. You get something that looks like almost new. And so for me, it's, you know, it's important underneath the car, because when you're servicing it, anytime you want to do something, you know, with an older car that's been winter driven, you know, none of the bolts come off and everything becomes like a major hassle. And, you know, finding something this nice for this kind of price is you know, a real find. And so that's why it's worth, for me anyway, the trouble of going to buy it in Japan, just because you get a car that's just in so much nicer condition than anything that you're going to find here. So for me, it's worth, you know, the hassle with insurance and registering it and so forth. So anyway, there you go. This is the undercarriage of the 2009 Honda Insight. Okay, so when I got tired of 18 liters per 100 kilometers in my Range Rover, that I started this research into what I could get that would lower my fuel costs. And then the challenge was to find the car that offered the lowest overall cost of ownership. Now I've got other cars like the Century and, you know, and Mercedes convertible and stuff. So I have other cars, but I wanted to, you know, I need something that's going to put on 100 or 150 kilometers a day and basically drive my kids around. And so that led me to 10 or 15-year-old Japanese cars. That led me to Hondas and Toyotas, which are the best of the Japanese cars. That led me to the Prius and the Insight, which get the best fuel economy and actually the highest reliability, even though there's more complexity. That led me to the Insight and the Prius. Further digging deeper into it, because I want like a nice car, I don't want to drive a beater. That led me to get the best examples I could find. I couldn't find any in Alberta. That led me to go to Japan, getting the newest, nicest ones I could find. That got me a very low kilometer Prius and a 17,000 kilometer 2009 Insight. So I drove both cars, compared both cars. I like both cars. I'd be happy with the Prius too.
But for the answer to the question of which one is the lowest cost, this is, because it's about 20% less than the Prius. And on the highway, it gets virtually the same or better gas mileage than a Prius. In the city, it's only about 10% less. So you're not going to make up the 20% price premium on a Prius with fuel economy. And the Insight's a little bit of a simpler car. So this is what I landed on: a JDM 2009 Honda Insight Hybrid, 17,000 kilometers, and it looks brand new. So I feel like I'm driving a brand new car. And I'm going to be, I'm going to probably sell this and get something else, try something else. I've got a few other JDM cars on the way. But in the meantime, I'm going to use this car, drive my kids around, and enjoy the saving. I'm going to park my Range Rover. And of course, the Century only sees, that only goes out on special occasions. But this is what I landed on. So anyway, it's for sale. I can always get more. But if you want a nice, safe, reliable car for the least amount of money, and what you care about is just going to work or driving your kids around, this is it. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Lawrence Romanosky and Aidan Goss from Calgary, Canada.